For 9 days, people walked past a parked car, never realizing that one of cinema's recognizable faces was inside, already beyond help. She was not the star whose silence went unnoticed. Across Hollywood's golden age, 14 performers passed away behind locked doors, inside forgotten apartments, or steps from telephones they could not reach. Some remained undiscovered for days. One lost his name for 19 months. Others watched the industry erase them long before anyone noticed they were gone. I'm Anne, and this is Hollywood Anne 268. Who were these forgotten legends, and how could fame leave them so alone? Number 1. Thelma Todd. Thelma Todd had built what contract players only dreamed of, a business beyond the studio, yet she was found inside a Lincoln parked less than 500 yards from it. By 1935, Todd had appeared in over 100 comedies, working with the Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, and Charlie Chase. Acting paid her, but ownership promised independence. Her sidewalk cafe on the Pacific Coast Highway drew patrons and carried her name above the entrance. After attending a dinner at the Trocadero on December 14, Todd was driven back toward the cafe Sunday morning. She could not enter her apartment. On Monday, her maid found her unresponsive inside a garage. Medical examination identified carbon monoxide exposure. Investigators considered possibilities, but no evidence established the crime stories repeated. An accidental attempt to remain warm inside the car remains the most likely explanation. The fact was outside the garage. Meals had been served while the owner's absence attracted little alarm. Her business continued functioning before anyone understood she was missing. Hollywood legends turn uncertainty into spectacle. Todd's dignity lies in what is documented. She tried to convert fame into ownership, and the enterprise could not recognize her silence. The next woman had purchased her home. Hours after her light remained on, a telephone receiver would become the unanswered symbol of another isolated ending. Number 2. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was not waiting for Hollywood to rescue her in 1962. She was negotiating her return in the first home she had owned. Fox had dismissed her from Something's Got to Give after absences, then announced legal action for breach of contract. The studio portrayed Monroe as a production problem. Missing from that calculation was her commercial power, and her struggle to gain authority over scripts, directors, and roles shaping her image. She had challenged studio control by forming Marilyn Monroe Productions in 1954. That helped secure a Fox agreement giving her pay and consultation rights. In the summer of 1962, negotiations were underway to restart Something's Got to Give. Publicly, she remained luminous. Insomnia and reliance on sedatives narrowed her margin of safety. On August 4, Monroe remained inside her Brentwood bedroom. At 3 that morning, her housekeeper noticed light beneath the door. Her psychiatrist entered through a window and found her unresponsive, with a telephone receiver in her hand. The conclusion was acute barbiturate poisoning and probable suicide. The receiver remains because it still suggests connection without answers. Her chapter was not surrender, it was unfinished negotiation. But the next performer would lose more than a contract. His voice remained famous while his name disappeared, unrecognized for 19 months after the world had stopped looking for him. Number 3. Bobby Driscoll. Bobby Driscoll's voice could remain forever young as Peter Pan, but the studio contract behind that voice expired when his face began to mature. Disney's first live-action contract star had won an Academy Juvenile Award and carried films Song of the South and Treasure Island. For Peter Pan, he supplied the voice and a reference for the animators. Puberty altered the product studios could sell. His voice deepened, acne affected his appearance, and Disney ended his contract in 1953. The transition from child asset to unemployed adolescent offered no support system. Driscoll struggled, encountered rejection, and relied on narcotics. By 1968, after incarceration and attempts to rebuild his career, he was living within New York's art community. On March 30, 2 children found him unresponsive inside an abandoned East Village building. He carried no identification. Fingerprint checks produced no match, so the city buried him without a name on Hart Island. His mother began searching. 19 months after his passing, an FBI fingerprint comparison restored his identity, but not a market grave. Hollywood had preserved the boy who refused to grow up, while losing track of the adult he became. The next man retained his name, an Oscar, and wealth. Yet after a fall in a 13th floor apartment, a telephone remained feet away, and 4 days passed before anyone entered. Number 4. William Holden. William Holden negotiated the richest contract in Hollywood history, yet 4 days passed before anyone discovered the Oscar winner needed help. For the bridge on the River Kwai, Holden received $300,000 plus 10% of the gross. To manage taxes, he capped annual payments at $50,000, a provision so profitable that completion could take decades. He understood that a star's security came from participation, not applause. Holden survived the collapse of the studio era. After career disappointments, he returned with performances in The Wild Bunch and Network. He invested energy in wildlife conservation and maintained homes beyond Hollywood. But professional independence carried a vulnerability. There was no studio machinery required to notice when his routine stopped. In November 1981, Holden fell inside his Santa Monica apartment and struck his head on a bedside table. The coroner concluded that he remained conscious for at least 30 minutes, but did not recognize the injury's severity. A telephone was nearby. Building management entered 4 days later. His contract could distribute income across decades. It could not summon a person across one room. The next woman possessed something Hollywood considered permanent, an Academy Award nomination that changed history. Within 11 years, however, bankruptcy papers replaced contracts, and her manager would stand outside an apartment door, waiting for an answer that never came. Number 5. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge made history in 1955, then waited 2 years for Hollywood to offer another film worthy of its nominee. Her performance in Carmen Jones made her the first black woman nominated for Best Actress. The honor appeared to open a door. In practice, studios restricted which romances and worlds a black leading woman could inhabit. Talent had been recognized, opportunity had not been redesigned. Dandridge kept working through films, nightclubs, and stages, but failed investments, taxes, and the cost of care for her daughter Heroine damaged her finances. In 1963, she entered bankruptcy, a process that revealed how little protection an Oscar provided when roles were absent. By September 1965, Dandridge was preparing for a New York engagement despite a fractured foot. When she missed an appointment, manager Earl Mills went to her Hollywood apartment. After receiving no answer, he forced the door and found her unresponsive. 2 medical conclusions followed. One attributed her passing to an accidental reaction involving prescribed antidepressant medication. The coroner identified a fat embolism from the foot injury. The record remains divided. Dandridge had not stopped trying to work. The available road kept slowly narrowing. The next actress faced a contradiction. Cameras loved the fear in her eyes, while standing before those cameras required the self-medication that would eventually leave her alone for days. Number 6. Gail Russell. Gail Russell became famous because the camera captured vulnerability in her face, but the fear seen on screen was the fear she struggled to control before every take. Paramount signed Russell as a teenager despite her lack of experience. Her eyes and manner photographed with intensity in films such as The Uninvited. Off-camera, she experienced stage fright. Alcohol became a means of calming before performing, a mechanism that allowed production to continue while dependence deepened. During the 1940s, studio employees supplied structure, call times, transportation, makeup, coaching, and supervision. When Russell's reliability declined and Paramount released her, infrastructure disappeared. She continued acting, but arrests, hospitalization, and worsening health increasingly replaced the routine that had once surrounded her. In August 1961, Russell was living alone in a Los Angeles residence. Neighbors became concerned after not seeing her for several days. They entered and found her unresponsive. She was 36. Medical findings cited liver damage associated with chronic alcohol dependency, along with malnutrition and complications. The studio had photographed her anxiety, packaged it as innocence, and sold it to millions. But no contract remained responsible for the illness behind the image. The next man seemed immune to such vulnerability. He made sophistication and boredom sound aristocratic, won an Oscar for it, then checked into a modest Spanish hotel where unanswered calls replaced applause. Number 7. George Sanders. George Sanders won an Oscar by making detachment look effortless, but the boredom of his persona concealed declining health and financial insecurity. As Addison DeWitt in All About Eve, Sanders turned a voice and contempt into precision. Hollywood hired him to play men who seemed untouchable. He understood the type and used it with efficiency, naming his autobiography Memoirs of a Cad. Prestige did not stabilize his later years. Poor investments contributed to bankruptcy in 1966. Then came a stroke, impaired memory, difficulty walking, and an inability to play the piano. These were not threats to employment. For a fiercely independent man, they represented the possibility of requiring assistance. In April 1972, Sanders checked into a hotel in Castelldefels, Spain. When he stopped answering calls, staff entered his room 2 days later and found him unresponsive. He had taken a fatal quantity of sedatives. His farewell note described life as boring, but reducing his decision to a sentence obscures the depression, illness, grief, and financial damage behind it. The sophisticated cynic had not been defeated by a lack of applause. His protective performance could no longer contain reality. The next woman was targeted for refusing political silence. Her white Renault remained parked on a crowded Paris street for 9 days, while an FBI file outlived the career it helped damage. Number 8. Jean Seberg. Jean Seberg's career was not damaged by gossip. A federal agency approved false information designed to punish her for supporting civil rights organizations. Hollywood had discovered Seberg through a search for Saint Joan, but Breathless transformed her into the face of the French New Wave. Visibility amplified her political choices. She donated money to civil rights causes, including the Black Panther Party. FBI records confirmed a COINTELPRO operation to neutralize her. Agents promoted a false rumor that the father of her child was a Black Panther leader to damage her reputation. The allegation entered the press. Seberg experienced premature labor, and her infant daughter passed away. Her husband, Romain Gary, believed the campaign caused psychological injury, although causation cannot be established. Seberg continued working in films, but depression, exhaustion, and reliance on medication narrowed her stability. On August 30, she disappeared in Paris. 9 days later, police found her unresponsive in the back of her white Renault, parked near her home. Authorities ruled her passing a probable suicide. The government files survived to document what private rumor had concealed. Persecution was part of the record, not a conspiracy theory. The next star left no federal archive. For 2 days, only her dog registered the silence, barking behind an apartment door while Hollywood prepared to turn the animal's distress into a cruel myth. Number 9. Marie Prevost. Marie Prevost's companion did not harm her. Her dachshund pawed and tugged at her, trying to wake the person no one had checked on for 2 days. Prevost had made over 100 films, moving from Max Sennett comedies to leading roles for Warner Brothers. Sound did not end her career overnight, but changing tastes, losses, fluctuating weight, and reliance on alcohol reduced her to smaller parts. The industry used her face. It paid less for it. In January 1937, she was living in a modest Hollywood apartment and attempting a comeback. A notice on her door asked visitors to knock once because the sound made her dog bark. When the barking became continuous, neighbors complained. A building employee entered on January 23 and found Prevost unresponsive. Examiners attributed her passing to acute alcoholism and malnutrition. Her estate was valued at $300, and a $110 promissory note to Joan Crawford was found nearby. Tabloid mythology transformed the dog's effort into a grotesque story that it had consumed its owner. Reporting supports the opposite. The animal had tried to rouse her. Hollywood did not merely forget Prevost. It rewrote her isolation as humiliation. The next man remained active and formidable. Yet unanswered calls accumulated for 2 days, and handwritten messages multiplied across his apartment door before one person decided to enter. Number 10. Albert Dekker. Albert Dekker was not an actor whom Hollywood had stopped calling when his telephone went unanswered. He had just completed a major western of the decade. Dekker built a career by projecting authority. His height, voice, and severity made him convincing as industrialists and villains in films Dr. Cyclops and East of Eden. He served a term in the California State Assembly, carrying responsibility beyond the studio lot. By 1968, he had finished work on Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. Professional relevance, however, did not guarantee contact. Friends who could not reach him began leaving messages on the door of his apartment. The notes accumulated while the door remained closed. On May 5, his fiancée entered and found him unresponsive. Investigators examined possibilities. The deputy coroner found no evidence of criminal involvement or a planned final act, ruling the passing accidental under private circumstances. Those circumstances have been exploited in sensational retellings. They reveal nothing about his character and will not be repeated here. The image is the door covered with messages. Concern existed, but action arrived later. The next woman had spent years visiting military bases, turning glamour into morale for strangers. Yet after one dinner, 15 silent hours passed inside her Pacific Palisades home before the man who had left returned to discover what no employee had noticed. Number 11. Carol Landis. Carol Landis was sold as a pin-up. While consequential work she performed took place away from cameras, before servicemen who knew the danger was real. During World War II, Landis joined a USO tour with Kay Francis, Martha Ray, and Mitzi Mayfair. They traveled through Britain and North Africa, performing multiple shows a day. Landis documented the experience in 4 Jills in a Jeep, in a book and Fox musical. The project preserved her as an author, not a photograph distributed to military bases. Service did not secure her post-war career. Fox ended her contract, and films offered less prestige. 4 marriages, declining income, and a relationship with Rex Harrison complicated an unstable period. None of those facts can explain a final decision. On July 4, Landis and Harrison dined at her Pacific Palisades home. He left later. The next afternoon, Harrison and Landis's maid entered after receiving no response and found her unresponsive. Authorities determined that she had taken an overdose of sedatives. She was 29. The pin-up had crossed oceans to make strangers feel remembered, yet her silence lasted through the morning. The next actress would experience a colder form of manufacture. Fox executives created her screen name from their first names, and when their protection vanished, casino debts followed her across Europe to one final locked apartment. Number 12. Bella Darvey. Bella Darvey's Hollywood identity was utterly manufactured until even her surname belonged to studio power. Darvey combined the names of Daryl and Virginia Zanuck. Born Bajla Wenger to a Jewish family in Poland, Darvey survived imprisonment in France before arriving in Los Angeles under the Zanuck's protection. Fox supplied lessons, publicity, and roles in Hell and High Water, The Egyptian, and The Racers. Her advancement depended less on an audience demanding her than on one executive selecting her. When those films disappointed and the personal relationship behind that protection ended, opportunities contracted. Darvey returned to Europe and continued acting in European productions. She lived with a gambling dependency. Casino losses consumed her possessions. Financial rescue from patrons could postpone debt, but could not treat the condition. In 1971, Darvey was living in a Monte Carlo apartment. She passed away from gas exposure in an apparent deliberate act. Over a week passed before anyone entered. She was 42. The studio had created a name, advertised it, then withdrawn the machinery that gave it value, leaving the woman behind it to manage illness and debt alone. The next star possessed a name no publicity department could quiet. Hollywood sold her as explosive, comic, and uncontrollable, but one morality clause turned a private pregnancy into a threat against her income, reputation, and future. Number 13. Lupe Velez. Lupe Velez was not the uncontrollable woman Hollywood advertised. She understood that exaggerating Lupe could turn an ethnic stereotype into employment. Born in Mexico, Velez crossed from drama into sound comedy when many careers ended. In 1939, The Girl from Mexico became a success. RKO built 8 films around the Mexican Spitfire character, making a Latina performer the commercial center of a franchise. The accent, speed, and eruptions were calculated entertainment, not proof that her life lacked judgment. In 1944, Velez became pregnant while unmarried. Morality provisions, Catholic belief, press scrutiny, and the father's refusal to marry her created pressures. No contract demonstrates that one clause alone determined what followed. Reducing her decision to professional shame would erase an emotional crisis historians cannot reconstruct. On December 13, Velez prepared flowers, wrote farewell letters, and took a fatal quantity of sedatives. Her secretary found her unresponsive in bed the next morning. She was 36. The tale that she was discovered in a bathroom was invented and recycled as comedy. Hollywood had profited from portraying her as excessive, then popular culture exaggerated even her privacy. The next woman mastered a different strategy. She accepted stereotyped roles, converted one into an Academy Award, and used the resulting influence to fight a housing covenant that threatened to remove black families from their own homes. Number 14. Hattie McDaniel. Hattie McDaniel won an Oscar in a segregated hotel, then returned home to a neighborhood where neighbors attempted to remove black families legally. In 1940, McDaniel became the first black person to win a competitive Academy Award for Gone with the Wind. She received a plaque, not a statuette, and sat apart from the film's white cast at the Coconut Grove ceremony. The victory broke a barrier without eliminating it. Hollywood offered her domestic roles, while denying black performers equal access to stories, contracts, and space. McDaniel converted visibility into lasting civic influence. In 1945, residents sought enforcement of a racially restrictive covenant in Sugar Hill. She helped organize the defense. Judge Thurman Clark rejected it, invoking the 14th Amendment. Her home remained hers. McDaniel passed away from breast cancer in 1952. Her request for burial at Hollywood Cemetery was denied under its segregation policy. She intended her Oscar plaque for Howard University. It was displayed there, then disappeared by the 1970s. Its location is still unknown. The Academy presented Howard with a replacement in 2023. Her isolation was not a room. It was an industry, celebrating yet restricting where she could sit, live, work, and rest. 14 stories leave objects behind. But which object explains Hollywood? The missing plaque, the telephone, or the contract that ended before need began? Hollywood connected these performers to millions, yet connection was never the product being sold. Their faces were. Studios supplied drivers, assistants, makeup artists, and publicists, while those faces generated revenue. When contracts ended, the machinery could disappear overnight, leaving illness, debt, grief, and aging to be managed. Some fought back. Some built businesses, challenged courts, served strangers, or reclaimed their names. Others left a barking dog, an unpaid note, or an empty space where an Oscar plaque once stood. I'm Anne from Hollywood Anne 268. When the screen lights up, will you see immortal stars or mortal people Hollywood stopped watching the moment audiences looked away?
Hi everyone, thanks for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.